Okay, so elastic block storage, there's actually 4 choices on these guys. So you determine, first of all, whether you need hard disk or SSDs. There's 2 of each type. The general purpose SSD, I consider that now to be kind of the default. So if you really not really sure what you want, just pick the general purpose SSD. It works for the biggest number of use cases. So SSD, solid state devices, solid state storage. So they're really good for random access. Typically, you're talking about a burst capability of up to 3,000 input outputs per second. Okay, so that's for random access, 3,000 input outputs per second. Now, the general purpose SSDs are bursting, which means that they have a low baseline performance depending upon the size of the volume. So the baseline performance is 3 IOPS per gigabyte, right? So if it's a 10 gigabyte volume, you're getting 30 input outputs per second as a baseline. Now, when you want to go above 30, if your application tries to, it will burst up to 3,000, and it will use that in a burst mode until you run out of credits. It's a credit type system. Typically, though, you don't run out of credits. It usually bursts up when it needs it, and then it goes back down. You accumulate credits whenever you're not bursting, so you're going to accumulate credits all those intermediate times. General purpose SSDs, they're reasonably inexpensive. They're really good for boot volumes. Great for any really instances that you want, databases even. But the next one up, provisioned IOPS SSD, is an SSD elastic block storage that does not burst but gives you steady IOPS all the time. And this is more commonly used for production, like relational databases, right? So any application that's always going to be accessing the drive continually, lots and lots of IOPS all the time. Then what you want to do is use the provisioned IOPS SSD. You can provision how many you want, up to 20,000, right? So it's actually a factor of 30 IOPS per gigabyte. So, at 100 gigabytes, you'd be able to provision up to 3,000 IOPS all the time. Okay. So basically, it'll give you that performance 99.9% of the time. Now that is an upcharge over general purpose SSD, so I generally recommend treat the general purpose SSD as your default, and only in those use cases that call for it, go for the provisioned IOPS SSD. Okay, then we got the hard disk based ones. Okay, now these are for when we have mostly sequential I/O access, not random access, but we've got large files that kind of stream off of them. Then these work the best. These are really not really rated for IOPS. They're rated for what we call throughput, right? So how many megabytes per second, right? So basically you get 40 megabytes per second per terabyte of storage. Right, you can burst up to 250 megabytes for storage for the throughput optimized HDDs. So they're pretty good for streaming a lot of data out of them. They're good for MapReduce and data warehouses. Okay, now the least expensive of all options is the cold HDD. Okay, these have a lower baseline throughput and burst up to only 80 megabytes per terabyte. So they're really good for infrequently accessed data that you want to store durably on a file system but don't want to pay a lot for because you don't access it very much.